Hello everyone, and welcome to round 5 of the 1970 Palma de Mallorca Interzonal tournament. Here, Bobby Fischer faces another Czechoslovakian grandmaster. It's Vlastimil Hort. Although today Hort is a German grandmaster, in those days he represented Czechoslovakia. He represented it in 11 chess Olympiads, and then later, when he got German citizenship, he represented Germany 3 times in the chess Olympiad. And he will be an even tougher customer for Bobby than Miroslav Filip, also a Czechoslovakian grandmaster who he faced in the previous round. You remember that game where Bobby played b3. And prior to this game, Fischer and Hort played some 5 games. 4 of them were drawn, and only 1 game was won by Bobby. But that was a blitz game in Herceg-Novi, so in classical time format, no games were won by either player. So definitely an important game for both of them, and Hort has the white pieces. He opens the game with e4. Bobby plays c5, the Sicilian defense, as he was known to play. It was a normal response for him against e4. Knight to c3, Hort chooses the closed Sicilian. d6, knight to f3, a6, g3, preparing to fianchetto the bishop. Knight to c6, bishop to g2, bishop to g4 by Bobby, h3, forcing Bobby to decide whether he will give up the bishop pair or go back with the bishop. But this was all Bobby's plan. He plays bishop captures on f3, allowing Hort the bishop pair. Bishop captures on f3, and now g6. So this is a pretty standard trade. Hort now has the bishop pair, but Bobby, for his remaining dark square bishop, he will be able to use this beautiful dark square diagonal. We have d3, bishop to g7, and now a4, preventing Bobby from further expanding on the queen side with b5. e6, we have bishop to g2, and now knight to g2, e7. Hort castles, Bobby castles, and now bishop to e3. And here, black has to figure out some sort of a plan. You definitely want to develop your queen, you have to connect your rooks, everything one wants to achieve out of the opening. And black wants to play queen to c7 here. But it's very interesting how Bobby goes about this. He doesn't just play queen to c7 and allow Hort to play whatever he wants. First, he plays queen to a5. This comes with a double attack against the c3 knight. So if bishop captures, you would recapture, and the queen would then win the b pawn. So here, Hort moves the bishop back, bishop to d2, now threatening some sort of discoveries, and only now does Fischer move the queen back, queen to c7. So instead of just playing queen to c7, first Bobby, as this bishop is much more active on e3 than on d2, first, making it less active, and only then bringing the queen to c7. So now, if white wanted to play bishop to e3 now, he would basically just lose a tempo, and it would be like Bobby got a free move for the queen, and now it's again Bobby's move. So after queen to c7, a very nice maneuver, queen to b1 now. We have knight to d4, and now a5. And now this a5 does grab a lot of space on the queen side, and if you could somehow get this knight to a4 to b6 in, that would be very nice, but Fischer doesn't allow it. He plays knight e to c6. Now, knight to a4, of course, will be met with knight captures, as now there is a double attack against the a5 pawn. We have knight to d1, opening up a discovered defense from the bishop towards the a5 pawn, and c4 pawn. c4 now. A very nice pawn move by Bobby that really allows him to activate his pieces. We have d captures on c4, and now knight to e5. Knight to e5, a very nice move, threatening to capture back the pawn, and there is no way for white to defend this pawn. If you even react to this in some way, knight to e3 doesn't really matter. b3, you would lose a piece here with knight to f3. Let's say you play something like knight to e3, knight f3 checks the king, and you lose the bishop on d2. So here bishop to e3 was played, getting the bishop out of that nasty d2 square. It's very interesting that this bishop was on d2 only because Bobby played that queen to a5 back to c7 move. But okay, knight captures on c4 now. We have rook to a4, and now comes rook to c8. Bishop captures on d4, bishop captures on d4, and queen to a2 now. With a double attack on the c4 knight, and here Bobby wants to get rid of the bishop on d4, as the knight for the time being cannot move, as the rook would be attacking the bishop. So you could play something like bishop to a7 if you want to keep an eye on the king side, but Bobby plays bishop to f6, and he wants to keep an eye on the queen side. C3 now, and now again it's very interesting how Bobby takes care of things on the queen side. The a5 pawn is defended nicely. The c3 pawn, now that Hort played c3, it's no longer a target, the bishop is no longer eyeing the b2 pawn, so all is well here. So what did Bobby play here? Here Bobby played bishop to d8, now creating a triple attack against the a5 pawn. The only way to defend the a5 pawn is to play b4, and while you have defended the a5 pawn here, now you've created a weak c3 pawn. Now you see that Bobby's knight is blockading this pawn, and now Bobby will once again attack the c3 pawn. So that's a nice thing to remember. If there's a backwards pawn you want to attack, first you blockade it, you don't allow it to be pushed forward, and then you attack it. Bishop back to f6 now, piling up on the c3 pawn. Rook to e1. We have rook f to d8, and now queen to e2. King to g7, we have rook back to a2, and now comes h5. Hort plays h4, queen to d7, and now king to h2. We have knight to e5, rook to c2, preparing to further defend the c3 pawn, knight to g4 with check, king to h1, and rook to c7. Now Bobby is ready to double up on the c file. Bishop to h3, and here Bobby doesn't allow pieces to be exchanged, so knight back to e8, preparing to bring the knight back all the way to c4. Knight to e3, and now queen to a4, not allowing Hort to push the c4 pawn, because the queen would then be attacking the b4 pawn. So first Hort brings the other rook to b1. Now he is ready to push the c4 pawn, but Bobby doesn't allow it. Knight back to c4. We have rook to a2 attacking the queen, and queen back to c6. Knight captures, queen captures, rook captures, so Hort was able to exchange queens, but still now there is a rook blockading this c3 pawn, and also the pawn is on a dark square, so Fischer can attack this pawn with 3 pieces, with both rooks and the bishop, but Hort can only defend it with the 2 rooks, as he does have a light square bishop. So we have b5 first here, there's no way to defend the c3 pawn. We have bishop captures on c3, pawn captures on a6, pawn captures on a6, and now rook to b6, attacking the a6 pawn. Fischer captures on e4, we have rook captures on a6, and now rook to e1 check. King to h2, d5 now. We have rook to c6, and now rook to a1, forcing a trade of rooks. Rook captures, bishop captures, and now a6. So if you look at this position, it is an opposite colored bishop endgame. So, usually this, positions like endgames like these would be a draw, but here Fischer is up a pawn, but not only that, Fischer is up a pawn, also Fischer has 1 pawn island, and Hort has 2 pawn islands. So okay, bishop to d4, first attacking the f2 pawn, but also not allowing this pawn to be pushed any further. So we have rook to c2, and now comes king to f6. We have f4 and rook to b8. It's very interesting that the a6 pawn would queen on a light square if it was ever able to get so far. And while Hort does have a light square bishop, which could kind of help escort it all the way to a8, Fischer has a pawn on d5, and things like this will not be possible. Rook to a2, you have to put a rook behind a passed pawn, that's the rule. Bishop to a7, not allowing the pawn to be pushed to a dark square. We have bishop to f1, and now king to e7. So here it's not all that easy to make any progress with black, but Fischer, will make an attempt, making the room for this pawn. Now f6 and d5 is coming. Fischer wants to create 2 connected passed pawns in the center of the board. King g2, we have king to d6 now. Bishop to d3, and now rook to b3, attacking the bishop. Bishop back to e2, and now comes f6, preparing e5. Rook to d2, rook to a3 now, eyeing that a6 pawn. Bishop to d3, and now bishop to e3. Rook to d1, and now rook to a2 with check. King f3, and now bishop back to d4. We have g4. Rook to a3, as the bishop now cannot move. Now e5 followed by e4 would be deadly. King to g2, now the bishop is able to move. We have bishop to e3 attacking the f4 pawn, and now king back to f3. Fischer moves it back to c5, and now we have king to g3. e5 now, preparing e4, attacking the pin piece. F captures on e4, F captures on e4, and now king to g2. You cannot allow e4 to come with an attack on the bishop while the bishop is pinned. H captures on g4, and now bishop captures on g6. Rook captures on a6, now Fischer is up 2 pawns. King to g3, and now king to e6. h5, we have bishop to e3. King captures on g4, and now rook to a4 with check. King to f3, and now bishop back to h6, not allowing this pawn to be pushed anywhere further. Rook to b1, and now comes e4 with check. King moves, now comes rook to a3 with check. King to g4, and now king to e5, hiding the king on a nice dark square. Rook to b8, we have rook to a1, rook to e8 now with check. King to d4, and now king to f5. Rook to f1 with check, king moves to e6, and here, after Bobby played e3, Vlastimil Hort resigned the game. Why did he resign? He resigned because there's really no plan here for white. You have to play something. e2 is coming, followed by e1, promotion to a queen. Once you move the king, simply rook to f2. You can prepare, bringing your pawn to e2. There's no way to prevent it with your light square bishop. And after white plays anything, there really isn't a good move here for white. Whatever you play, e2 is coming, and then again, whatever you play, bishop to e3 will block the rook's attack against the e pawn, and it's all over. Whatever you play, e1 is coming, and it's all over. So yeah, that's a game from round 5, Vlastimil Hort versus Bobby Fischer. A very nice victory for Bobby Fischer, of his first victory in classical time format against Vlastimil Hort. So very nice achievement. Again, only one draw to start with, and then 4 consecutive wins in a row. In a row, it's a very nice tournament for Bobby Fischer. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it, and that you're enjoying this coverage of the 1970 Palma de Mallorca Interzonal tournament so far. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with a game from round 6, where Bobby faces his old nemesis, Samuel Reshevsky. Thank you all, and I will see you soon.